Well, thank you very much. And you know, this morning, the wonderful talks we had this morning were to convince you that most of what you hear you don't really have to be afraid of. And I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to tell you something you really should be afraid of. I'm going to talk today about bioterrorism. And you can say, well, you're an orthopedic surgeon. What are you going to tell us? Why are you involved in bioterrorism? Well, I was chief of surgery right after 9/11 at a major trauma center, and we were always short of things. And so what happened was the county health department bought a decontamination unit, spending $250,000, partially of my tax dollars. And I was trying to figure out, what are they going to decontaminate? What is all this talk? What is all this anthrax? What's going on? So I decided to educate myself, and one of the things I learned from all this is that I was trained in the Navy, and I spent time on the Navy Research Advisory Committee as a civilian, and one of the things I figured out is that the reason you're not hearing about this, the reason that I think as a nation we're not doing the things we should be doing about it, the people that are really expert in the bugs, the infectious disease guys, generally have no understanding of threat assessment or strategy. They're not from the military. And there are a few people that are making a point that they're kind of both, but they're really not being listened to very well. So I decided to figure this out for myself, and I'm just going to convey to you what I think about this. You know, there's no risk-free existence, but thinking about bioterrorism, now I'm in a fairly small town now in Iowa. So looking at it from my perspective, I said, what threats can I do something about? What am I powerless to avert? I'm not going to waste my time worrying about that. And how do I reasonably maximize my safety and minimize my risk and that of my family? Now, you know, we can worry about a lot of things. And in small town America, I don't worry too much about conventional warfare. Nuclear attack may be an issue. I'm 30 miles from SAC. We used to be ground zero under the Russians. I don't know where we are in their list now. You know, I'm not worried about chemical problems or terrorism, specifically coming to my town. But everybody, no matter where you live, you have to be worried about biologic warfare, because it's the gift that keeps on giving. It can happen in New York. It can spread to Logan, Iowa. Now, Michael Osterholm is one of the few guys. He's an infectious disease expert, and he's thinking about this. He's thinking about this from the threat assessment. And his point is, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. That's the smallpox virus up there. There are three levels of concern. There's biowarfare, bioterrorism, and biocrime. Biowarfare is obviously targeting armies and millions of people. Now, Nixon in 1972, he officially stopped our offensive biowarfare program by signing the treaty with the Russians and 138 other signatories. Now, it only stopped offensive biowarfare research. Immediately, 11 signatories we knew were violators, especially the Soviets. The ink wasn't even dry on the treaty when the Soviets turned around and made the most massive, robust bioweapons program ever on Earth. They had tons of India 1 smallpox, the most deadly virus known to mankind. They had 4,500 metric tons of anthrax. Now, we sent our inspectors over to see that they were complying with the treaty, and they all came back and said what nice people they were and that they were complying, but we really knew better. You know, our defense experts saw warheads being tested that had nose cone cooling. There's no reason to have nose cone cooling for nuclear weapon delivery. That's only for biologics. And we saw these things coming down with multiple parachutes, so we know they were up to something. But biggest of all, we had defectors from their bioweapons program called Preparedness. And the most notable, his name really isn't Ken Alibek, it's like Kanajian Alibechikov or something, he's Russian. And in 1993, he told us things we just didn't want to hear. That they had stores of smallpox, that they had weaponized anthrax that was resistant to vaccination, that they had all sorts of stuff. And he told us that they took these, their little germ things to Iraq and North Korea, among other client states. Now, you know, there are 4 attributes you want in a terrorist weapon, or actually in any weapon. You want it to be affordable, you want it to be able to reach the target, you want the desired outcome, usually death, and it has to, at least up until recently, the people we encountered, they didn't want to die themselves. They really wanted to have no self-damage. So why bioweapons? Well, first of all, it is really cheap compared to nuclear weaponry. They figure that for $1,500 worth of killing power nuclear, you can obtain the same killing ratio with 1 cent of research into bioweapons, which has prompted Hasemi Rafsanjani years ago to say, biologic weapons are a poor man's atomic bomb and we should consider this. And that was years ago. The other thing is it's very difficult to detect bioweapons during planning. You know, if you set up a nuclear program, look at all the things we hear about North Korea and Iran at this point. I mean, nuclear programs, there's lots of telltale signs. But the problem is a bioweapons lab looks just like your college biology lab. It looks just like my hospital lab. It looks like, you know, and you can also say it's a defensive biologic warfare lab, so then you get around all the treaty issue. You know, it's also very easily transportable. You know, it's a little hard to put, even small nuclear weapons are somewhat difficult to transport, but biologic weapons are really easy to transport. You know, you can put enough smallpox in an egg that can kill 60% of the world's population, so it's pretty easy to get around. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. You know, yes, a nuclear weapon could wipe out a lot of surface area, but then it stops. But bioweapons, you can start small and it can spread to the whole world. It's self-replicating. It's also possible to immunize the deliverer. You know, great, you immunize your population, let the rest of the world not be immunized. And it can allow long getaway times during incubation, so it might be very difficult to determine who actually, if somebody wanted to do a stealth attack, it's very possible to do that. And in general, we're very bad at figuring these things out, so it's easy to get away with it. The other thing is it's a huge fear factor. I mean, look at SARS. And I'm not saying that was a bioweapon, but I'm saying the problem is that when people are very, very afraid of disease entities that they don't understand, and quite frankly, there are not that many people died in SARS, but look at it immobilized Europe immobilized Asia for a while. Look at what happened with the anthrax letters. It shut down Congress for 3 months, which actually that might not have been a bad result, but anyway, it was far, there were only 5 people died in that, yet, you know, it was shut down for a long time. Now, it's not new. In 600 BC, the Assyrians poisoned enemy wells with rye ergot, and of course everybody knows about, you know, throwing plague bodies over the walls in medieval sieges. The smallpox in the French and Indian Wars is now open to new debate. Because obviously this is before Pasteur and Koch, and people didn't really completely understand germs, but so it may have been that was an innocent thing with the blankets, but what's really an interesting one is this outbreak of tularemia on the Eastern Front in World War II. Everybody knew this happened, and everybody assumed, as we did, that it was just a naturally occurring outbreak. But it turns out that now that we've had the fall of the Soviet Union, KGB archives are open to us to some degree. We've read some of the Venona transcripts. We know that this was actually, the Russians know it, this was a bioweapons program that got away from them on the Eastern Front. We didn't figure it out for 50 years. Another great one like that is the bogwan. I had a friend from Oregon that you just mentioned his name, he just started shaking, but the you might be, Dr. Robinson's here. The Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh in 1984 wanted to take over this small town, and he wanted to skew the votes by making a bunch of people sick so they couldn't show up to the voting polls. He had a nurse that worked for them, and she poisoned a salad bar at this local restaurant with salmonella. I don't know if you remember this. And it did make a lot of people sick, to the point that the CDC sent their biggest investigators out. You know, I don't know if the WHO was there, but we sent a bunch of epidemiologists out there. And they all concluded, after much research, that it was actually a naturally occurring thing, and they blamed it on the head chef, who became an alcoholic, and all these bad things happened to him. Well, years later, the truth only came out because there was a power play within the organization, and the Bhagwan ratted out this nurse and then turned her into the authorities for having poisoned the well, having poisoned the salad bar. That's the only reason we figured it out. Our brightest minds did not figure out this was a biocrime. The anthrax, you know, this was a big deal. This is the last big, I guess, attack we've had. They still don't officially know who did this. There have been lots of guesses and lots of people's lives disrupted. But you know, you think about this and how much it cost and how much it shut down the Congress. It was done by just you know, a very small amount of anthrax and a couple postage stamps. Now, it was not done by somebody in their basement, I can tell you that, because this was very highly weaponized stuff. It was weaponized with this fine silica particle, so it was the absolute, if you're going to do it with anthrax, this was the absolute worst case scenario of anthrax. And Aum Shinrikyo, that kind of the weird group in Japan that used sarin gas, they were able to pull something off with sarin gas. They tried to do this, they couldn't do it, because this takes a big lab with some big powerful equipment to do it. It wasn't Iraq probably, because Iraq used a different strain. I thought what was really disgusting, I'm from Iowa, and Iowa, Ames is one of the huge, if not the biggest, agricultural research places in the world, and we had, up until this time, the largest banking of anthrax samples. So we had all these, I think it's phage-typed samples, whatever they do to type anthrax. And as the FBI came to question them to see if they could compare the anthrax in these letters with those so they would have known where it came from, Iowa destroyed all its samples. What? Why would you do that? I find that a little disturbing. Actually, this is just my paranoia, but I think personally it was the 9/11 guys that did this. And the reason I say that is, one of the things you don't hear very often, but the very first victim of this anthrax type was the husband of the realtor that rented Muhammad Atta's apartment to him. I don't know, that just strikes me as kind of a weird coincidence. But the point I'm going to make is that in terms of transmissibility of a bioagent, one single spore of anthrax prepared for 3 days, multiplied, would have been enough for all those letters. So, it doesn't take much. An interesting use of biowarfare here, bioterrorism, that an Israeli medical journal reported that terrorists that are suicide bombers are being infected with hepatitis so that when they blow themselves up, not only do the people they kill, but then the people that are alive are infected or are sprayed with hepatitis positive blood. Now, there's multiple modes of delivery of a bioweapon. I mean, you can put it in the water supply, which I'm not so worried about in America because we test and treat our water supply daily. It would be very hard to get past it in here. But a lot of the world doesn't, so that you can imagine poisoning water and having, poison troops that are marching towards your area. We can obviously use missiles like the Russians had planned on. Aerosols are a big thing because it's a great terrorist weapon. And then obviously human vectors, you can infect somebody and let them just walk across the border. Now, this was my own table. This is just me looking at it and thinking for myself. So the thing I thought is, what's the absolute worst scenario we ought to worry about? What of all these agents, when you read this literature, they kind of make all these agents kind of equally scary, but really they're not. When you start thinking about it, what you want to know is it contagious? Does it spread beyond what you drop it on? Is it deadly, and is there a cure for it? And when you really put it down on the table, the one of all of them, I mean, Ebola is a perfect example. Ebola is that terrible hemorrhagic fever that people get in periodic outbreaks in Africa. It kills you 95% of the time. It's very deadly, but it doesn't spread very much. And you have to be in contact with, it has to be transmitted by blood or semen or body juices. So it's direct contact, you don't breathe it in. So yeah, it's terribly deadly, but it'd be very hard to infect a lot of people. But smallpox has the great bioweapons attribute that it's extremely contagious, it's extremely deadly, and we have no cure today. In fact, in the 20th century, there were 500 million deaths of smallpox, which dwarfs the total deaths from war, AIDS, and influenza in the 20th century. Now, what's it take to be a bioterrorist? Well, unfortunately, not very much. You have to have the bugs, you have to have the cultures. You need a simple lab with a hood, and basically the equivalent of college biology. Now, maybe not to pull off that weaponized anthrax, but for other lesser things, you can do it with basic biology. So equipment is really not the problem. The problem is the knowledge to make these really big programs. And in 1991, after the Soviet Union fell, what happened to the bioweaponeers and biopreparat? It was a huge program, and those guys were kind of left out there on the island without support from Moscow. So what did they do? Well, they sold themselves, we think, to the highest bidder, and we don't know exactly where they've gone. We're pretty sure some went to Iraq, some went to North Korea. We don't know past much. So a couple things happened. Years ago, when the Bhagwan poisoned the salad bar, his nurse ordered that salmonella off by calling up a supply house. And for a long time, you could order this off the internet. But and I give Clinton administration credit, in the 1900s, in 1997, they decided, and I think this was Michael Osterholm or somebody like that got to him and said, two things: do not destroy our smallpox stores, because the guys in the CDC wanted to destroy the smallpox stores, saying, hey, there's no smallpox in the world, why do we need to keep having this stuff? Well, you need it for research in case it comes out from some other lab. And the second thing is, you need to guard our bioweapons potential pathogens. So they made it illegal to have, you can't just buy this stuff anymore. You have to have registration. You cannot just willy-nilly order up Ebola off the internet. And any lab that does bioagent research can't have people from countries sponsoring terrorism. Now, to show you how contagious this is, look at the last European case of smallpox. In Germany, there was a guy that showed up, and I think he'd been visiting Pakistan, and he was sick with something, but keep in mind, even by 1977, they hadn't seen very many cases in Europe at that point. So they didn't know exactly what he had, but they knew it was something bad, so they put him in an isolation ward. It's an old-time German hospital. It's one of these long, narrow isolation wards, and he's way in the back. Well, this was in the middle of winter in Germany, and he opened the window a little crack against medical advice. They told him not to do that, but he cracked the window a little bit. His exhalations went out the window. They proved this later with smoke studies. Went out the window, kind of went down the wall, crept over across the street, up to another wall, into another window, and killed 7 student nurses in the next building. That's how contagious this stuff is. It's not something you can easily run away from. In fact, there was another guy that showed up at the hospital looking for his sister, and again, the sign was posted, "Don't enter," but he opened the door a crack just to talk to him. Way down the hall, the patient was, and that guy died of smallpox. Now, in 2001, after 9/11, the Army did a war game called Dark Winter. It was a biologic war game, and using human models and human actors and then a lot of the computer stuff, they postulated what would happen if we released as a terrorist smallpox in 3 states. And they put it in an aerosol can in men's rooms. That was the scenario. What happened was, within 2 weeks, 13 days later, smallpox was in 25 states, in 15 countries, and thousands were sick. Now, this is to me one of the more chilling things to think about. In Yugoslavia in the 1970s, one of the last cases of smallpox occurred. It took 18 million doses of smallpox vaccine to stop the outbreak. Now here's how in those days, when we still had smallpox, but we were coming to the end of it, when we got smallpox pretty much under control, but there were these sporadic outbreaks out in the world, this is how it worked. The CDC and the World Health Organization had groups of scientists and physicians and people that were at a moment's notice ready to go. They had their bags packed, they were like rapid response teams, and if a case broke out in Bangladesh, they were there overnight. They had stores of smallpox vaccines stationed strategically around the world, and most of the world had been vaccinated at that point. You know, there was a high rate of vaccination among the population, especially in Yugoslavia. So even then, it took 18 million. They would do ring vaccinations, and they keep going out in bigger rings until they stopped it from spreading. It took 18 million doses and a while to get it stopped. Now think about today. We don't have any of those things. We don't have a rapid response team. We don't have vaccine depots all over the world, and most of the world now is not vaccinated. Now interestingly, I thought everybody stopped vaccinating their children and their people. Not so. Recently, I had a high school in my office in a clinic patient. I saw a 15-year-old guy from Argentina who was an exchange student to my little town in Iowa. And I saw him for his shoulder problem, and I happened to notice that he had the smallpox on his arm. So wouldn't that be the kicker, to find out that there were many countries that are still vaccinating for smallpox, but the great Satan is not. You know, that's a problem. Now, this has prompted, if you read the JAMA consensus report, that they understand this. They said the discovery of a single suspected case of smallpox must be treated as an international health emergency. And that smallpox's potential for devastation today is far greater than at any previous time. Now, it gets even uglier. As I said, there is no good here. This is assuming that these rogue states, if they were going to release smallpox, and by the way, we knew that Syria was testing it they were testing smallpox on prisoners. We know that people have Syria. We found in Iraq, in fact, this is another aside, I hate to keep saying this, but it just drives me crazy when I keep hearing people say, oh, there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Yes, there were. At least there were bioweapons, and they're terrible. I mean, don't think weapons of mass destruction are just nuclear. They're not. And we found, you know, containment facilities labeled smallpox in Iraq. Anyway, that's assuming that these rogue countries would not genetically modify the pathogen. But it's very possible to do so. We can build the polio virus from scratch now. And gene splicing kits are sold on the internet. And we know that some of these things, like plague, does in fact have this really highly mutable area that you can actually manipulate. Now, here's a scary story. And there was a research article that came out a number of years ago, probably about 10 years ago now, from Australia. And what these guys did is they looked at 3 strains of mice that, and by the way, pox vaccine or pox virus is endemic to all animals. It's a natural population control. So there's cowpox, sheep pox, mouse pox, there's even mosquito pox, okay? And so there's a mouse pox. Well, they were using 3 strains of mice. They were using standard non-immune mice. They were using mice that had non-immune that had been vaccinated, and then against mousepox. And then they were using a 3rd strain that was naturally immune. And they exposed them to the standard mousepox. And the vaccinated ones didn't die very much. The naturally immune ones died a little bit more, but not very much. And then the non-immune ones died over 60 to 70% of them, being exposed to mousepox. Then they took a mouse, and this is the kind of stuff you can buy on the internet. They took a mouse immune gene and they spliced it into the mousepox. And it's one of these IL genes, which we have homologous genes in our body. Human genes have the same kind of thing. Anyway, they spliced it in the mousepox, and then they gave it to those 3 groups, and everybody died. So it's possible to create, right now, we have the technology probably to create a virus that can kill us all, and we don't have a treatment for it. That's not nice to know. This is also very costly. I mean, somebody ran the numbers and came up with an idea that it would cost $5.4 billion just to take care of 100,000 exposures to tularemia. The FBI says that the cleanup of the Congress and the post office and everything from those few anthrax letters was over $1 billion when you added it all up. So even if you don't kill a lot of people with this, a terrorist that really wanted to be nasty could just economically bankrupt us. So who's going to do it? I mean, this is not just for people that just want to, this is not like to extort you for something, because this is really deadly stuff. So they really want us dead. And besides the religious zealots, you've got the apocalyptics like Aum Shinrikyo and maybe even, Ahmadinejad. They keep talking about the 13th Mahdi. I don't know what the truth of that. But there are people that really believe it's their moral duty to bring about the end of the world. And this is a perfect vehicle. Soloists don't need a big infrastructure. So you could create if you're just a guy in the basement with a grudge, you can create a lot of disruption if you know a little bit of college biology and get a hold of some of this stuff. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on in Syria, so I just wanted to bring you up to date a little bit, talk about about Syria and their bioweapons program. And I will tell you that we're kind of in denial about that in the US. In Europe, they really understand this stuff and they really are worried about it. We know that Syria has very extensive experience working with these pathogens for reasons of industrial cultivation. They use research for animal husbandry and for civilian vaccination. So they've got very sophisticated labs, and we know they have these Class A pathogens: anthrax, aflatoxin, plague, tularemia, smallpox, and camelpox. Now, besides the sophisticated labs, what should have awakened us to what's going on over there is the fact that their pharmaceutical industry and these research labs are not under the health ministry, they're under the Ministry of Defense. Okay, so they're militarized. And the other thing is that we have very direct evidence, including the pictures of the Spetsnaz agents that moved from Iraq, part of their bioweapons program. Iraq's bioweaponeer, the head gal was Taha, yeah. And they call her Dr. Germ, and I always remember Dr. Germ. But in any case, my favorite answer there, she said, when OMSCOM was quizzing her about the bioweapons program in Iraq, and said, Dr. Taha, we know you're lying, you know you're lying. Why don't you tell us about that? And she says, it's not lying if you are ordered to lie. But anyway, we have pictures, we have pictures of the Spetsnaz people who moved their bioweapons program. Now, it's not that they brought from Iraq to Syria the camelpox. They probably already had that. But what they brought was the ability to do sophisticated weaponization and dispersal. It's not the quantity of the pathogen anymore. In my lifetime of studying this, from the time that the Russians really were doing these big vat things, it's changed to having small production facilities of very highly toxic qualified stuff. And although in my table that I made originally, I didn't show botulinum toxin as very bad, because botulinum toxin would have to be spread, it's very difficult, it was very difficult to spread. However, now we have these milling processes which can create this crystalline structure. They call it crystal bot, kind of like crystal meth, but this is crystal botulinum. And they can mill it so that it's extremely aerosolizable and dispersive. And they estimate that a gram can cause 1 million deaths. So we've gotten very much more sophisticated in these bad bugs. And we know that Syria does microencapsulation. The microaerosolization is really for terrorist use only, I can think of. And then the parachute dispersal from their missiles like the Russians had. They run this out of the SSRC. It's the Syrian Scientific Research Council. That's headquarters in Damascus and Aleppo. We've been able to observe these big buildings. They have separate wings for each pathogen. And they're committed to deniability. You know, they're committed to telling you this is just for defensive or this is just for agricultural use. And one of the ways you do deniability is that you use organisms that are naturally occurring. So they have a cryptosporidium program. Cryptosporidium's a waterborne parasite, and it doesn't necessarily kill you, but it could sure slow down troops. So let's say the Israeli troops are advancing through Lebanon, and they can find some areas in Lebanon, they put cryptosporidium in, and it breaks out, and any water you drink, you get very sick for a few days. Well, but it's deniable. It's naturally undeniable, but it can really be a problem. You know, so what's America doing? This is what drives me crazy. Well, you know, we sit around and we always fight the last war, and so we're still thinking about the Soviets and how the big programs they had. The other thing is, you know, one of my points, and this was years ago, to the governor of Arizona, who, you know, God help us, is now our Homeland Security chief, but Governor Napolitano, I wrote to everybody right up the chain, and including the chief of the preventive medicine in the state, and I said, look I'm just saying you should allow first responders to get vaccinated voluntarily. Don't force it on anybody. Everybody can look at a risk-benefit analysis and decide. But if you have nobody in the state vaccinated, what do you think is going to happen if this thing breaks out? Who's going to take care of people? Who's going to give the vaccinations? Just let us have it voluntarily. And the answer I got was that the governor was afraid of being liable through workman's compensation claims. So, you know, we got to get over that. And then we're basically, I think, in an institutional denial. And there's a gal named Jill Decker that's, if you want to read more about this, she's really the religious, I mean, she's really into this. She works as an advisor for the European Union. And she says the reason that the United States is just kind of so worthless on this whole stuff is that we just have lost our understanding because, one, we have 3 years State Department rotation, so nobody lives in the cultures overseas long enough to really figure out what's going on. We've lost our human intelligence, and we're overly reliant on satellites for our intelligence. Well, we've heard that in other areas of you know, military, that the satellites don't do everything, but it's really true for bioweapons, because think about it. You know, it's not like a gamma flux meter. There's really nothing you can measure to tell you that you've got smallpox down on the ground in an egg. You can't do that from up in the sky on a satellite. You've got to have human intelligence in that lab. And the other thing she points out, just like I point out, is we have no defensive preparation in this country. We're not thinking about this. Just like, you know, the DDP here is trying to get people to think about defensive maneuvers in case of nuclear accident. It should be in case of a bio accident or a bioterrorist accident. You know, and the sad thing is, when you think about what we should do and you go on the internet and look, you'll find more stuff about how to survive the zombie apocalypse than you will on how to survive a bioterrorist outbreak. So here's our plan as it stands right now. And this is really kind of strange. If you go to your state, I will guarantee you the one group of people in your state who are vaccinated against smallpox are your county health workers. If you're a physician, you know what I'm talking about. When's the last time anybody that was really sick went to the county health department who didn't have VD? You know, really? I mean, that's all they do, as far as I can determine. And smoking cessation. But they're vaccinated. The rest of us are not. Then their plan is, if smallpox breaks out, that we will ship the vaccine from the depots. I asked my county health physician, where's the depot? And he couldn't tell me. So this is not going to be pretty. And keep in mind also that if you happen to be the poor guy in the hospital emergency room where the guy comes in who's got smallpox, you've all been exposed, and vaccination within 4 days of exposure may mitigate death, but it doesn't mean you're not going to get the very disfiguring disease. Also, I would say, think about a few years ago when we had the big flu outbreak. How well did they get the vaccine out to everybody? What did we see? We saw people standing in these huge lines. Well, in this situation, those huge lines, that's called a killing field. I mean, that's crazy. That's not going to work. Now, here's what I think is going to happen if this ever breaks out. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but, you know, to me, this is the scenario. I actually started trying to write a novel about this. So, some terrorist nation state sends somebody over infected with smallpox. We know it's in labs all over the Middle East and Europe and other places. Oh, and by the way, how did it get to those labs? How did it get to the biopreparat? The World Health Organization, believing that all nations are equal, when smallpox outbreak would occur, they would take samples and they would send it equally to the CDC and to Vector, which was the equivalent of the CDC in the Soviet Union, and Vector would immediately turn it right over to their bioweapons program. So anyway, we know there are samples of smallpox all over the world. So smallpox gets infected to somebody. He comes to the United States on a plane. Now he's getting sick. He goes to the emergency room or he collapses in a hotel somewhere. He's exposing himself and shedding virus to everybody who comes in contact with him, including the emergency crew. He goes into the emergency room, but you know what? They don't know, early on you don't look this bad. You're just sick and you've got maybe a couple little blebs on you. You're spreading virus, but you're not really pathognomonic now. You can't really make the diagnosis because you haven't seen smallpox. And now it's a delayed diagnosis. This guy's very sick. And I'll tell you another little dirty secret about hospitals. None of us have real isolation rooms. There are no, I mean, in our operating room in Arizona, you could, when they cooked hamburgers in the kitchen, you could smell it in the operating room. There's no isolated airflow in most, even these so-called isolation rooms don't have protected airflow. Okay, and so now we've exposed the entire hospital and the EMTs, and you know, there's nothing more fearful than this. When people start dying, people are going to flee. You're not going to have a medical staff there to take care of people, and it's going to just mushroom. Who's going to be the truck driver that's going to bring the virus down? You know, I mean, the antiviral vaccine down. You know, you're going to have a breakdown of transportation. You're going to have a population flight. There's no quarantine procedures in place, and the vaccines don't get distributed. I think that's what would happen, unfortunately. So here's what I think we need to do, and this is the only reason I've gotten involved in saying anything to anybody about this, is that I think we need to at least demand that first responders, not just hospital personnel, and indeed first responders of all sorts, police, fire, if you educate them, and that's another point here, is you have to have public education about this, like you have public education about nuclear issues. They would want to be, when I sit around and talk to nurses at the hospital and I really give them a short version of this brief, they all want to have a voluntary vaccination. I mean, you know, after 9/11, everybody in the military is again vaccinated for smallpox. You who've had vaccinations, by the way, it probably only lasts for 15 years. So those of us who had it more than 15 years ago, it's probably not good anymore. But my point is that we haven't had death and destruction from these vaccines in the military. In fact, I don't know of one complication in the military. Unless you're really HIV positive, immune compromised, or you have a history of generalized eczema, your chance of having a complication from the vaccine is extremely low. You have, by the way, heard of complications from the flu vaccine, the cervical cancer vaccine, and other things, and nobody seems to care about that. So that's not a reason not to give the smallpox vaccine and make it voluntary. We need to pursue our defensive research big time, and we need to deal with these cutting through the red tape and deal with litigation. Every active duty military should have, which they do, they have the smallpox and anthrax vaccine. They should also carry botulinum antitoxin factor 7 to prevent bleeding out. And I think we need biodisaster public education, just like we used to do the, you know, get under the desk and the things that they've quit doing on nuclear that they shouldn't have quit doing. But the same kind of principle. We need to know something about biodisaster education. You know, because we're going to have to deal with, if it comes out, and I think it's a matter of when, something is going to occur, you're going to have to do things. And one of this, obviously, we have to deal with bodies. You know, Alex Jones, these people are all worried about finding all these casket-like things stored by the government, but maybe the government knows that this is a risk. I mean, there is a possibility. If you really had a pandemic, you do need to deal with that. But you do need to develop some kind of quarantine strategy. In the old days, when smallpox was endemic in America, people knew not to go to the hospital. You sheltered in place. You stayed in your house, you got medical care in your house, and they did the best they could for you. The problem now is the minute you get sick, you're going to go to the emergency room. And so the centers for medical care are going to go down. And so we do need to have, the only way, especially if these things are not treatable, and especially if there's no vaccine against them, the only way you stop them is to stop the movement of people. And how we do that and preserve individual liberties is something we've really got to address. You know, why should we be worried about this? Because we hear traffic. Now, Osama may be dead, but in one of his broadcasts to the faithful, he pointed out, we heard these things, like we're 90% ready, what they don't expect. But he talked about black wind to America. I don't know about you, but that to me sounds like disease. Who knows? But you know that if we're thinking about it, if we understand it, they understand it. Never underestimate your enemy. That's people all over the world know about bioterrorism. And we know the Syrians have been working with it. So, you know, in my opinion, the one history lesson is that central government fails to do the prudent thing to protect its citizens over and over. And we need to take local control of this. What am I doing myself? Here's my own, I mean, you can only do so much. You know, I've educated my family. I have a son who's a physician, or going to be, he's a medical student. And we have at least a family disaster plan, how to get in touch with each other if you're separated. And I bought some N90 masks from the hospital. Those are the occlusive masks. Anything short of that, those little stupid masks that they wore in China during the SARS epidemic are worthless. It has to be an occlusive mask. I did find a source of smallpox vaccine. This is very interesting. I write a column for WorldNet Daily, and I wrote about this. And I said, if anybody out there, you know, because they have a lot of information, if anybody out there knows how to get a smallpox vaccine, let me know. And somebody wrote and said, yes, they got it at the Salpêtrière in Paris. I think that was where they got it. They got it in Paris at a hospital anyway. So possibly worth a trip to France. And I think you need to just be prepared to hunker down. Truly, I've told my kids, if smallpox breaks out anywhere in the world, you come home, you don't leave till this is sorted out. Because this is going to be a nightmare overnight. So you don't want to be on a plane, you don't want to be on a bus, you don't know what, you know, you can't be in contact with people until they sort it out. To the point that I said, when my one son, this kind of a day and a half, about 8-hour drive, and can't make it on a tank of gas, I thought, you know, this might sound extreme, but it might be worth putting an LP gas thing in his truck, you know. People that are far distance, make it better to come where you don't have to stop anywhere. That's really going to be the issue, is you don't want to come in contact with anybody. And I'm just reminded of T.S. Eliot's poem, "This is the way the world ends, this is the way the world ends, this is the way the world ends," not with a bang, but with a whimper. That's a pretty sad, but a pretty accurate description of what could happen if some of this gets away from us. So, thank you very much. Go ahead.
I'm Harrison Brundage, retired geologist, Houston. I want to compliment you on a very good paper. This is, to me, an update of what we had in ABC Warfare, Naval Reserve Officer School in Houston, 1964, and a lot's going on since then. I was a little late getting in, so you may have answered this, but do you have any comment on that scare about botulism and tomatoes? I thought it was so foolish to put a lot of tomato farmers out of business for a full season because somebody didn't know that you don't get botulism in the field. It's got to be in some closed container. Somebody remembered to close the top.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the ALAR thing. There's a ton of examples of this. You know, the problem is, I mean, and I was saying this to somebody else, I think the problem we have in this country is a failure of scientific education at low levels, so that when people read the newspaper, they should understand that, but they can't sort it out.
Well, somebody in the USDA should have known that.
Well, you'd think so.
Put a stop to that silly business. Thank you.
You'd think so. But never let a good crisis go to waste. Maybe that's what their thinking was.
I'm Jerry Cutler. There's an organization in New York, the American Council of Science and Health, and has some very credible people there, as you sure are aware. Do they have any, have they reviewed this,
Well, like concern? I say, I mean, the Journal of the American Medical Association consensus in 2003 said it was a big thing. But if you look, nothing's happening. I mean, I don't know that anybody, you can look by state and see how, for a while after 9/11, they were vaccinating first responders, physicians and nurses in emergency rooms and stuff like that. But it was done by state, and some states were almost negligible. It turned out Arizona was the lowest of the 50, but it's not very many people. If there's 1,600 vaccinated in the state, it's going to be amazing. You know, so, and I'm not saying it's just about smallpox, but that's the one, you know, in medicine we kind of have this fear, or this principle at least, that there's some things you can afford to miss, but there's some things that are so deadly you just can't afford to miss them. I mean, you can't miss the kid with meningitis. You got to treat it before you can prove that's what it is. And this is one of those things where if it comes about, then it's too late to have anything in place. And the least you have to have is a cadre of people that can then give vaccinations and organize the medical response. And if you don't vaccinate anybody, that's the problem. So I would ask, I mean, I don't remember New York as being particularly up on this, but I mean, I could check in.
There's FEMA, I guess. Is that your organization for emergency measures?
Yeah, but FEMA doesn't have anything to do with this. unfortunately. I think FEMA, now, they may be vaccinated. They may have vaccinated themselves. And in fact, interesting, it was available for political people to get vaccinated. So, you know, our congressman could get vaccinated.
Is cowpox still the form of vaccination?
It's a modified version.
Modified?
Yeah, it is modified. And they're working on, like, the latest, my understanding is, and again, this is where I'm not an infectious disease guy, but the latest vaccine is not the exact vaccine that we used, you know, 60 years ago, but it's based on cowpox. I mean, that's how it all started.
Would other poxes be effective, like mosquito pox you mentioned?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, the reason, you know, Edward Jenner and cowpox, the story is he recognized that milkmaids didn't get smallpox in an age when smallpox was endemic in England. So if it were other pox viruses that we were exposed to, it wouldn't have been that observation, I would suspect. Yeah. So, yeah, I know. Can you do it yourself? The other thing is, if you know, no, I don't, but I'm just saying, yeah. Right. Is there a way to get it? Yes.
What would it cost to vaccinate all Americans?
Well, we probably have the vaccine sitting in store piles. If you get rid of the litigation cost, it probably wouldn't cost that much. I mean, how much does it cost to get flu vaccine to people? So,
okay, so we're talking $100 million, $1 billion?
Yeah.
What?
You know, I wish
Just general terms.
I'm going to guess it's about that. I heard some number in the hundreds of millions for making the stockpiles.
Okay.
So the stockpiles, we don't have enough stockpile for everybody right now, but we have a lot, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. I should look that up. I mean, if it's like flu vaccine, it's a couple bucks per vaccine. So how many of us? 320 million, so we got $600 million, maybe? Now I'm in trouble. And are you vaccinated, just out of curiosity?
Oh yeah, I'm vaccinated.
Yeah, because through the military, or?
I used to work at Fort Detrick.
Okay, so there you go.
We worked on monkeypox quite extensively, and the problem we found was an aerosol inhalation, which an intentional attack would be. It seems like it's your own immune system causing the damage in your lungs, and the vaccine's not been shown to be protective against an aerosol attack.
In monkeypox?
For monkeypox. We assume for smallpox as well.
Yeah.
The fact is, your own...
But don't you get, I mean, the presumption at dark winter was you would get smallpox.
Cytokine storm.
Right.
And that causes the tissue damage. So very quickly you get a fulminant bacterial pneumonia after this.
So if a terrorist used that, it might not be as, so the dark winter scenario might not really happen. What really would be better would if you infect a person and have them walk across the border with smallpox.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Well, I'm saying that isn't
the Soviets
aerosolized.
weaponized a couple hundred metric tons of this.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, yeah, you would still have the infectivity to other people, but the actual pathological damage that's occurring in the lungs is from your own immune system. So being vaccinated against smallpox probably wouldn't protect you against an aerosol attack.
Right, but the aerosol, the point is that the aerosol would only directly affect a few people.
No, the aerosol would go down for hundreds of kilometers.
Well, but it's not going to be the whole
done.
world. But once somebody gets smallpox as a disease, and they start pustulating and they start radiating the virus.
The fomites, yeah, they would be secondarily contagious.
Then what the vaccine prevents is from this getting away from us and being a worldwide pandemic. I mean, if they don't modify it.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not going to say it's going to save us, but I'm going to say it's a chance of saving us in a natural wild outbreak.
What we're saying is if you vaccinated the entire population and you had a properly formatted aerosol attack, people are still going to die.
Well, it's like in any battle or in any, you're not going to save the first few. No. But I'm just saying you can't aerosolize the whole world. But you can infect the whole world with somebody walking around and depositing.
I see your point there.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about.
Okay.
Yeah, you might lose an arena full of people to the aerosol at the NFL game, but you're not going to lose the whole world if you vaccinate people and they're using a strain that we can vaccinate against. My bigger concern is the one from Australia, is that they some idiot modifies this smallpox.
It was IL-4.
IL-4, thank you. I knew it was an IL.
The Australians actually cloned it in.
Yeah.
But the smallpox virus itself has interleukin like genes in there already.
Yeah, but it's theoretically possible to make it so we can't vaccinate against it. I don't know about, on any of this stuff.
I don't know about that.
Well, we
Anyway,
don't know.
It's,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is the science, a lot of this is still, when D.A. Henderson came out with his way to do things against cidofovir, which is a drug we did show
Right.
had protectivity, everybody jumped on that bandwagon. There's still some alternate ways.
But
for
that's much
defense.
more expensive, actually, than the virus.
Cidofovir? Oh, yeah, I went out and got
Much more
stock in it.
expensive. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. All right, thanks.